All right. Hello, everybody. Thank y'all so much for coming to today's event. Welcome to the Future of Libraries, Humanity, Technology, and the Stories We Preserve. We are thrilled to have you all join us, and we're especially grateful for today's panelists and moderator who've taken time out of their weekend for this meaningful discussion. To introduce myself, my name is Jen Brown. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm one of the community administrators for We Here. I'll be the behind the scenes tech facilitator today, helping make sure that the Zoom runs smoothly. And I just want to quickly cover some housekeeping before we start. Number one, if you have questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A function to put those in. And then number two, this event is being recorded and we will be sharing it at a later date publicly. Now, this is a free webinar, but we want to thank all of those who purchased tickets as a donation. It really means a lot to We Here to be able to support this work. So if you would like to see more events like this or to support We Here in an ongoing way, you might consider joining our Patreon or our Seed Circle communities. And I've put a link to that in the chat. Now, without further ado, I'm excited to hand it over to our moderator, Veronica.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, everybody. As Jen said, thank you guys so much for taking time out of your busy weekends to spend with us. I'm Veronica G. Henry, author of The People's Library and your moderator for today's panel. I can't tell you how excited I am to be in conversation with such a dynamic group of thinkers. We've got archivists, we've got librarians, people who are dedicated to their communities. So I am the reason that I wrote this book is not only because I love libraries, which of course I do, but because I looked at them and I recognized them as places where history is recorded, places where memory is shaped, and where communities gather. So we're in a critical moment right now with technology where it's changing everything we do, particularly AI. It's changing everything we do and how we interact with information. So I think the role of the library is even more important now than ever. So today we'll be kind of exploring not only what libraries are becoming, but what libraries should become, and more importantly, who should have a seat at that table while we're having these types of conversations. But before we dive in, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and I'll start out with the first person I see, who is Gabby.
Hello, I am Gabby Womack. My pronouns are she, ella, and I am a librarian at Tufts University's Tisch Library, as well as a historian and book influencer. So some folks here might know me as Bookish Afro-Latina.
All right, let's go to Lorraine. What's up next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lorraine Ojo Ohikware. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the processing and university archivist at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, which means I'm responsible for preserving all of those folks' stories, one of many across the country. I'm also a co-facilitator and co-creator of UMBC's AI Privacy and Ethics Symposium, the AI Working Group, and newly accepted doctoral candidate at UMD's Information Science and Leadership Program. So I'll be focusing on AI and the role of academic libraries.
Awesome. Thank you, Lorraine. Edwin, you're up next.
Thanks, Veronica. Good to see everyone. It's an honor to be here. A shout out to Merlin. I'm in Seattle, Washington. Again, my name is Edwin Lindo, he, him pronouns. I am the founder and executive director of Estelitas Library here in the Pacific Northwest, and also a professor of critical race theory at the University of Washington. And it's so good to see all the folks here.
Thank you, Edwin. Keisha, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Keisha Koich. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a school librarian in my third year and currently in a high school in Boston. So, really happy to talk about the connection between libraries and students.
And last but not least, Azad.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Azad. I am the digital archivist at UCLA, where I oversee the day-to-day operations of our digital preservation lab and steward our born digital content. So anything from floppy disks to web pages. So I'm also really excited to be here and think about how we interface with technology and the type of implications for our own data sovereignty and autonomy moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you guys all again. I want to start us out with something foundational. So we know that libraries are cultural anchors, especially for marginalized communities. So our first question is, what do you and or your current institution do to truly serve and connect with your local communities? And Edwin, I'd like to start out with you first.
No, I appreciate that. You know, we realize that books are just the beginning. At the end of the day, we're talking about building community, about connecting with folks where they are, with the needs that they have. And so, yes, we are Estelita's Library, named after our now 8-year-old daughter, and started with in an old coffee shop with wooden shelves that we put up that we bought at Lowe's, and thousands of people showed up just week after week after week and have been holding us up. But what we're also seeing is the books, again, are just one part of it. So the way we've served our community is we have been a food pantry. We now have a mutual aid station that's permanent in the space, getting through 10,000 pounds of food every day just in front of the library. We have a electric car share that we created so community can get access to move around the city, and it has an ADA accessible lift in the back. And our biggest project yet is we're about to develop 40 units of affordable housing in a historically Black and brown neighborhood in Seattle called Beacon Hill. And all that because of books, right? Books is the backdrop. It is the art. It is the literature that allows us to have these conversations and think in a form of liberation and freedom that sits outside of the gaze of what is not possible. And so what we're saying is when we build with our community, the answers are there. And that's why I love this group here is folks are doing that on a daily basis. But that's how we see it is relationally, we are in community. So when we talk about, oh, well, what's your community engagement plan? We don't have a community engagement plan. We are in the community. We are it. We live here. We grow up here. Our kids go to school here. We know where the neighbors are and we take care of each other's kids. And when we do that right, we don't have to practice or learn it. We realize that our folks care and they will make our institution survive. And that's the end of it. And the last thing I'll say is I think that this is the moment where we have to build our own institutions that make this the dominant institutions have to respond to.
Absolutely. I'd like to invite the rest of the panel to weigh in on this one. Particularly, I know that Gabby, I know that you're doing some work also engaged with students there in Boston, if you'd like to speak to that. And then everybody else, feel free to weigh in.
Yeah, absolutely. At Tufts, I'm a student success librarian. So I'm kind of in that in-between zone, in between educating the students, so giving them instruction on how to find information and how to analyze that information. But I'm also the person who's more involved with the community. I'm one of the front-facing librarians there. So Joanna, my coworker, both of us are student success librarians, and we spend a lot of time reaching out to, we have diversity centers, the DSDI group is what they're referred to as, and each of these centers are focused on the diverse populations of the Tufts community that are usually not given enough or previously have not been given enough attention in higher ed overall. So these are folks who we have a lot of programming with, especially the first generation students, especially the LGBT Center. And one of the groups that we're now focusing or refocusing on are graduate students, as we've found that they are actually the ones who are struggling the most with food insecurity, as well as with finding connection on campus. They're only there, sometimes for a year, sometimes 2 years. And so they're usually not the main focus of most administrations in higher ed. So we have started programming that centers their connection to one another, as well as our non-traditional students, including those from a program called My Turn, which is a program where students who were formerly incarcerated are entering the academic sphere at Tufts. They were previously in a program while they were on the inside, and now that they're out, they are working towards a degree at the university. And so we have a program trying to connect them with peers who are also, people who have kids, people who have jobs outside of this. So it's just, it's a big mixture of things. And I try to throw in my love of recommending diverse books as well. But yeah, that's the mix of what I'm doing for our community, and I'll stop there because I feel like I'm doing too much.
If I can jump in, um, at AOK at UMBC, the library is really a microcosm of the larger institution. And so it's really the hub of where students go and connect aside from, where the food is and X, Y, and Z. And it's really the building is where idea sharing, idea generation, questions, everything kind of corrals itself in that building. And so my library, like most other libraries, are really focused on making sure that we are maintaining and bringing new students in to that environment for idea sharing. Um, when it came to the symposium and the work that I do related to more of the AI stuff, it was an invitation really to invite diverse perspectives. Our administration is really trying to figure itself out. And so one of our groups that we serve, of course, students, faculty, staff, and in some cases, the public. But we really wanted to make sure that the student voices were actually captured and considered. And so, between the AI symposium and making sure that it's a diverse roster of speakers to kind of report on their perspectives or their research related to this new technology, we also run listening sessions, which is kind of a closed door forum. No faculty, no anyone in the library is really running these sessions to invite students into this safe environment to make sure that their voices are heard. And when we as faculty, non-teaching, but uh, when we as faculty are in these different spaces, whether we're serving on committees or teaching one-shots or anything like that, we can then advocate for what we're hearing from the students.
I can jump in next. I myself am a digital archivist, so I actually don't really interface all too often with the public in person, like our friends here, which is really cool to hear about. But mostly do a lot of that interfacing work with donors at the point when we're bringing materials into the collection. And so when you're dealing with digital storage, media, sometimes people are donating thousands and thousands of files and they don't really know what they're downloading all the time, or rather ingesting into an archive. And so what I like to do is really sit with the donors side by side and try to get a holistic sense of what they are comfortable sharing, what they are giving us full consent to actually bring into our archive. And so a lot of that is just asking open questions, making sure that we're collaborating with one another. And then also, making sure this is an iterative process and not just like a one-stop type of conversation. Also being flexible, right? So when we're experiencing shifting political conditions, let's take an oral history interview that was conducted 10 years ago, is going to look completely different than if it was conducted now. I've had a couple instances, without going too much into detail, of folks who are undocumented, who are migrants, who now might not want that type of content to actually be housed in our collections. And so being attuned to the contemporary demands of social and political movements and understanding how digital media, with how vast it is, and also how much our donors may not actually know about their donating, making sure we're in constant conversation and collaboration with one another, and then also consulting them during the description process. So if there's people that I come across and I don't know who they are, and I want to make sure I'm being like accurate to the historical record, consulting them and making sure that it's a collaborative process and that they have their voice shine through in the metadata as well.
I so I'm the librarian at the John D. O'Brien, and that's a 7th through 12th middle and high school. And the library really is it's a commons for the school. It's a gathering place. It's a transformative place. It really shifts depending on what students need at a given point in the day. And I think that's a really beautiful aspect of the library and really important. Um, to have a third space where students don't necessarily come in with an expectation put on them, but really they might come in with a question or a specific need, and in being in the environment and being in the library, they're getting so much more. And it really is a space for community. The other space that although I'm new in the role, one of the things that I've been really excited to see the library transform when we're doing when a class might be starting a unit on the Harlem Renaissance, for example, and as the librarian, I can think of, okay, what are the experiences I can help facilitate or kind of have the library transform into to build that background knowledge for students. So that might look like getting in speakers. It might look like, what did I do? I went to the record store and I got a bunch of records that were pressed in the early 1900s just to give students those kind of touch points and like to kind of plant those seeds. So the library is doing a lot, and I really love the library.
Ditto, ditto. Thank you all. We're also, thanks to AI, seeing a major shift in how people access information and how they interact with that information. Can you each talk a little bit about how AI tools are impacting like the needs and the expectations of your patrons, of the people that come in? Azad, you can speak to the donors, but I'd like to understand more about how AI is actually impacting the patrons that come to you guys.
Yeah, I can
And
jump in
yeah, whoever wants
about
to jump
the
in.
students. Yeah, so as I was saying previously, I am working with both programming and with teaching. In regards to programming, I have started getting more students who are trying to make sure that we're not using promos created by AI each time that they are coming in. So there's usually at least one or two who ask when they see our promotions. I make the promos myself, so I know. So I'm like, nah, girl. But yeah, usually there'll at least be one who comes in asking. Because we have a museum and fine arts school that's attached to us, and our artists are frequently, being um, threatened by this generative AI rise and people stealing their artwork and creating different versions of that. So they're very concerned about it. The ones that I'm starting to be more concerned about are the students, the first year students who I'm working with. So these are the same kids who were, COVID kids. They were taking online classes. Now they're coming into the classroom and they need a lot more assistance um, when it comes to getting them to feel comfortable with engaging with critical thinking. It takes a while to get to that point, in part because of how they've developed this kind of sense of impatience um, and kind of expecting material and information to be easily found without really digging into it, which is not what I do with them. So that's probably annoying to some of them, I'm sure, when I start diving in. But I have a mixture of students in my class where some of them are skeptical of AI and refuse to use it, and then the other ones have already embraced it or are resigned to using it. Like they just think this is going to happen anyway. So what I'm noticing is them being less persistent when they're searching for information. They kind of like they find one thing and then they just stop, or they don't find anything and then they're like, "Well, what did I do wrong? I didn't do, I did what you said." And then I have to slow them down and be like, "Okay, but you didn't do what I said. You jumped before I told you we can get going." So we've had issues like that. I've noticed that they're annoyed by not getting sources as quickly as possible. I'm trying to explain to them that they're not always the audience for what they're looking at. Sometimes the information that they're finding looks like it's about what they want, and then they open it up and it's this huge study with a lot of like specific jargon that they have no idea about. And I have to be like, okay, either you're gonna get a dictionary and sit with this, or we're going to have to try again. And it's that persistence and the comprehension and analyzation skills that I'm getting worried about because of that frequent AI usage. They're using it for everything from like writing emails to summarizing information. So I haven't seen a lot of them with the skill of close reading. Um, that's what I'm noticing with my patrons now.
If I can add to that, that's definitely reflected in my environment also. But then also, like, I have been serving more in the forum of like collaborating with faculty and just hearing from what faculty are thinking, how they're approaching, and then knowing how students are relating to this new technology. There's a shift in trust between groups of people significantly. And then when you add administrators who are essentially sculpting the guidelines and policies for the use, and it really creates a lot of anxiety for a lot of people, and that's for whether you are pro or completely anti AI. There's a significant shift in the trust relationship in a higher educational environment that is going on. And if there isn't really regulation or policy that's being put into place, no one really has footing to kind of at least see the light at the end of the tunnel as to how they feel or how they're going to use, when they're going to use, or making the decision if they're not going to use, and having that mutual respect of what people's decision making is. I think that really that's a huge conversation that's being had right now on my campus about what is the new relationship profile between faculty and their students, undergrads and graduates, administrators, and everyone under the umbrella who, once their decisions are made or once their guidelines are promoted, it affects those people in that trusting relationship. So
That's interesting. I have a similar thought on the trust dynamic, but like specifically from a labor perspective, because we've had a lot of at UCLA, and specifically in my unit in library special collections, we've had some instances of there being a top-down push. So administration wanting us to pilot and trial various AI tools and large language models to do description and do processing work, essentially. And so the idea would be that some of the images in our collection that have never been processed or described, we would feed them into these tools. It would output the description and then basically describing what is going on in the photos using like some of the date, like the contextual information inside of it, approximating dates, etc. And then that would be what we would present to patrons when we would put it on a website or putting on a finding aid to make it accessible to folks. Which is concerning because a lot of the times this kind of goes against how processing archivists in particular, are trained. It forces them to completely pivot in terms of their skill set and their own job control in a way. And also it does a disservice to the patrons, right? Because it favors this model based on trying to accelerate the means of description and doing it faster in a way that skirts over that intentional engagement with the materials that is based off of a human-to-human interaction. It also runs the risk of outputting inaccurate or ahistorical metadata. I know that when we did our pilot of this one tool, I think it was like a JSTOR tool or something, the metadata was wrong sometimes. There would be a cloth that was hanging on a clothing hanger and it would say it was something completely different, right? And I think that kind of points to the fact that a lot of the adoption of these tools don't actually address the root issue of what we're trying to deal with, which in our situation is the backlog, is the fact that we have too much stuff and we don't have the labor, the resources, the technology to responsibly steward it, i.e. hoarding in a way. So I think that that's something that needs to be considered is like, what do we actually have the responsibility in terms of stewardship and collecting? And sometimes the answer is we simply don't collect or we don't process.
I'll jump in quickly. We engage with fundamentally different folks. We're in the hood, we're with our community, and AI isn't part of the practice in the space when you walk in. We have our books. We also have a number of events. Like today, we're hosting a community swap meet, like a flea market, and folks are setting up their tables, they're selling, they're exchanging, they're bartering. It's beautiful. We have chess days every second Saturday. We have Saturday math academies where Akeen Austin comes and will teach second to eighth graders everything from algebra to geometry and theorems. And none of it is, we don't even have computers in the space, really. On the flip side, we also encourage folks who come, and we've incubated at least 4 different Black-owned businesses out of Estelita's library. And the biggest issues folks have is the lack of capacity, usually because that's a cost that just outside of the realm of what they have before them. But when we can sit down and say, hey, there's an opportunity to create a business plan, we're going to have to review it. We're going to have to understand it. We're going to have to really make sure you know what this means. And you can go to the bank and get a capital loan to help you expand your business. They wouldn't have done that before, again, because of the capacity. So we are very much situated on when we talk about art, creativity, AI is a thief, right? That's what it is. That's its job. It literally goes, scrapes the internet, and then it recapitulates it. On the other side, it builds capacity, I think, on a technical component that could be really useful for our communities who have been left out of these spaces of loans. And honestly, I've used it to support community who's like, I feel like I'm getting discriminated against. Great, let's go do some research and find out when your home got appraised and it was undervalued by $300,000, how were the other 6 homes around your neighborhood appraised? Oh, we found out that your home was undervalued and you're the only Black family in the neighborhood. Right. So there's components of it that perhaps with the right policies, but also I think just with the right values of knowing, like Assad mentioned, we should not be using AI to eliminate cultural work and folks who are preserving who we are. And simultaneously, how do we leverage it to support our community who have been historically left out of conversations because we don't have capital? And let's, I don't mean to take too much time, but we'll get to the bigger conversations. They know that's taking all of our jobs. That's why tech, I grew up in San Francisco, tech back then was talking about universal basic income. And now it's the front runner conversation of universal basic income because they don't know what's going to happen when folks get laid off and they realize, oh, we just created an economic class that can organize and demand justice. And they're worried that that justice may come sooner than the value that this AI is going to produce. So we are in a fascinating position at this particular moment. But at the end of the day, and this goes to a different question that we may not get to because I love all these rich answers. But at the end of the day, we are the technology. AI is not the technology. AI is just an iteration of the knowledge that our people have. And when we can appreciate that we are the things that have kept culture alive, that our ancestors who told stories around fires in churches and on Sunday evenings at dinner is the technology, and that AI can never in its whole life attempt to do that in any real way, then we can be okay and say, well, AI can't be us, even when it tries. And when it gets close, it's not representing the folks that are in this room. It's representing the folks who inputted the data into that AI. And so then we'll have that conversation when it happens. But I've said a whole lot, but I really appreciate what folks are sharing.
Thank you so much, Edwin, for bringing that up because I feel like in the school library at least, students really are wanting to have these conversations. They are having these conversations with each other about what their values are, how they're using this tech, kind of asking each other, oh, are you using Gemini for this? Oh, I use Claude for that. And I think that's really interesting. And I think in the library in particular, because it is a third space, there's less judgment. Students feel very comfortable letting me know if they're using AI because and I don't take that trust for granted because I'm not grading them and it's actually really interesting to hear their perspective and like how they're making sense of this thing because it's here and a lot of as this conversation goes on and we're thinking about wait how does this fit into our world having young people as part of the conversation for developing terms of use, acceptable use policies in schools. How are we going to make sense of this thing? What are the moments that we use this? When are we not going to use it? We all, even on this panel, we all have our own line on like what is acceptable for this and what's not. And that is informed by our culture, our values, the discernment that comes is shaped and it's who we are. And I think young people deserve to be a part of those conversations to share like, hey, this thing is happening in their landscape is so much going to be shaped once they graduate. I'm thinking about like the seventh grader who's entering, um, and the senior who is leaving and going to be going to a Tufts or a university or starting their job, and entering the workforce. What does their reality look like? And how are we preparing them, to be successful? And then it opens up this other can of worms of what is success and all those things. So it's definitely affecting people, and young people in particular are wanting to have those conversations without the stigma that's also attached to, oh, I used AI for X, Y, and Z. Everyone has their own understanding or their own judgment on, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Does that devalue what your own knowledge came from that? I don't, there needs to be space to kind of have those conversations.
If I could just say one more thing, I think
Please.
everything that everyone has been sharing has been so interesting because I feel like I'm seeing the thread directly to value, even if it's a conversation of um, what is the most efficient way? What is it's all based in what is the crux of the conversation? What is the value system? And it makes me think of, well, what is the value system of a person? What's the value system of a university? What's the value system of a school? What's the value system of a private library or a public library of the United States? If we want to make it that big, like what are our values and how is that going to be the driver for how we interact with this technology while trying to simultaneously be inclusive, that everyone has a different background and a different experience and a different approach and a different line. It's really interesting.
Yeah, can I add on that real quick? Because something that you're reminding me of is, which we actually talked about when we all first got together, was that one quote it's an Amiri Baraka quote in his one essay on technology and on the uses of technology. And he talks about how technology is essentially any tool that expands upon a human's ability to complete a task. It acts as our interface with the physical world, and so it is an extension of the creator. As the creator, you imbue your own values into the technology that you're creating. And so when you have these LLM companies, when you have the Anthropics of the world, they're very clear in what their value system is by who they're contracting with, right? You know, we see them directly working and being used on the front lines of a war in Iran right now. And so now we have a very clear conceptual understanding of where their values are. And I think we personally have the responsibility to do that research into their origins, into those contracts, and make that type of evaluation when we decide to adopt them and integrate them into our own work. Because that is a part of how they're being wielded, right? Not only what are they doing, but how are they being wielded and what is the political objective and how they're being wielded.
I completely agree with that, but I also feel like we're living in a society where that perspective is in direct conflict with the efficiency and the capitalistic approach that we as a society have adopted. I think someone standing on their values at one time, used to be something of note. Whereas I feel like we are driving in a direction where that person can still and most likely will be trampled down. And that's the type of society that I want to avoid. I would much rather spend an additional hour processing a collection than relying on ChatGPT or Gemini when I know that I am capable in my value system, but I also know that higher beings are not going to necessarily make the space for that decision. So, really fascinating.
Absolutely. If we could segue from there, one of the things, I mean, I've always been a reader, and I know everybody on this panel is too. I've always been a reader, and much later that translated into writing. But writing and reading are definitely ways in which we process all of the junk, right? All of the stuff that's going on in our current society, all the things that are going on internally. And that kind of leads me to think about books. So if you guys could speak a little bit about books besides this one. Um, Books that have illuminated some of the challenges I think that you see um, that libraries are facing today.
I recently talked about one, so I want to bring this one up. So this is a middle grade book called The Last Cuentista, like The Last Storyteller by Donna Barbara Higuera. And basically the idea is that there's this girl named Petra Pena who is um, on this, basically she's on this spaceship leaving Earth because Earth has been hit by an asteroid. And when she's on this ship, she's suspended in animation as everyone else is. But by the time they reach the new planet that they are trying to inhabit, when she wakes up, she realizes that an extremist group has taken over the ship and has erased everybody's memories of their past home of Earth. So they've started a whole new society and everything, and she seems to be the only one who remembers what happened. And so she is now tasked with being the one using her family's storytelling traditions to educate the fellow passengers, and basically make sure that people don't forget the successes but also the failures of our past, because she recognizes even at a young age that when we forget, that's when we're more likely to repeat harm and seek control over others. And so she is uh, this is like one of my favorite books of all time, by the way, so please read it.
Who else has a book?
I have a book. I recently read, which has been on my list for a long time. It's called Everything for Everyone, An Oral History of the New York Commune, 2052 to 2072 by Iman Abdelhadi and Emmy O'Brien. It is completely fictional. Well, completely, it's speculative fiction, so it's very much rooted in reality, but it takes place during the middle of the 20th century. War, famine, economic collapse have toppled world governments, and a revolution takes root in the global periphery and then ends up hitting the United States. And so a group of oral historians in this post-revolutionary world conduct oral history interviews with some of the key revolutionary leaders of that time. And so it's a big like negotiation between like memory, resistance, and how trauma affects memory recollection, but then also like oral history as a means of like people first documentation and putting the means of documentation in the hands of the people. And one of the very last chapters says something really profound about nostalgia and how we should do away with nostalgia because it locks you in a state of view that looks to the past and glorifies it and sanitizes it rather than thinking about the future and how we can start to build new relationships with one another and build new societies with one another.
That sounds like a good one.
I'm gonna need to get this book immediately.
Anyone else?
I'll add one. Oh, go ahead, Lauren. Go ahead.
No, please, Edwin, go ahead.
Well, this one's heavy. There. So speaking of fiction, I read a book by Sibyl Campbell called "Sky Full of Elephants," and as a critical race theory scholar, it just was a fascinating allegory. Effectively, the story is from the first chapter, all white folks in the United States ultimately took their life. And it was the story of what does it mean to live in this country as a black person or a mixed person, but anyone who had one drop to live the rest of their lives absent of whiteness. And you ask, how does it relate to libraries? You're like, Edwin, that's way out there. Like, what are we talking about? What they wrestle with, I don't think necessarily Siebel may have done it intentionally, but like it really gets to the epistemology of like how is knowledge produced and whose knowledge is it and who gets to keep it and who doesn't. And you saw the wrestling of, in many instances, our knowledge, meaning folks who have been historically oppressed, folks from the global south, have only interacted with the world because it is a story antithetical to whiteness. And what I mean by that, as far as libraries, is where and who and what are our stories outside of that gaze? Who are we when we are actually free? What stories would we tell? Like the one you wrote, Veronica, the story that contemplates who am I when I'm free? Or are our stories always in relation to a struggle? The struggle's beautiful, but does it always have to be that story? Can it be something else? Can it be boring? Can it be about the colors that are on the trees and be beautiful? And I think they can, but we have just constantly been the antithetical subject of dominance. And I really appreciated the exploration of what does it mean to create your own knowledge when it isn't in opposition of something else.
Keisha, did you have anything to add to
Oh,
this one? Yeah.
I so before I was a school librarian, I was an elementary school teacher. And I want to share, I know Dog Man coming after Sky Full of Elephants feels like a real big leap. But I do think it's just really important to think about how kids are talking about these things and where they're getting. I know I see some like laugh emojis in the chat, but I do think it's really important. So Dog Man and the Scarlet Shredder, um, I read it because my students were obsessed, and it was one of those books that like is talking about AI and technology and how like how young people are relating to this thing and the youngest among us. And I thought I think it's interesting to um, remember that kids are watching us and how we relate to tech. So when they're all making sense of like seeing adults on phones, seeing adults using ChatGPT, AI, they're hearing it in the zeitgeist. And I think that this book is an interesting kind of snapshot of that in in a more like larger metaphoric way.
Awesome. And that definitely does fit. I think the one of the reasons I was so excited to have Keisha on this panel is because she has that perspective, not only of being, the elementary school teacher, but also being a librarian working with teens every day. And these are the folks that are kind of going to be at the forefront of this next wave of what technology is going to look like, how they're going to impact what laws are created, and again, just what things are going to look like going forward. But one of the things that I have been exploring in my work and with the People's Library is this idea of an archive where people can interact, with preserved digital, copies of human beings, of historical figures, curated by folks like you guys. My next question is, so as AI tools are increasingly integrated into public life, into technology, into everything that kind of exists right now, do you see this as like a real possibility? Do you see that integration? Would that concern you? And what do you think about that? Does it excite you? Does it scare you? What does that future integration between humans and technology and libraries look like for you?
Yeah, I hate
Oh,
to say it, but I do see it. Um, I see a possibility for it, but I also see that folks like us and other folks who are historians and activists and information professionals have already been raising the alarm about the possibility of there being detrimental consequences for something like that. So I think that if it does happen, it won't come easily, is kind of what I'm thinking. And I say that because like, I'm not exactly excited about this possibility. I'm someone who is deeply skeptical of anyone trying to deliver a one narrative to me. Um, because I'm wondering who exactly is giving me that. Whose narrative are you sharing with me? What is the reason why you're sharing this story and not another story? I'm concerned. So if somebody has the power to create AI versions of these historical figures, how else can we expect that they might whitewash it the way that we've already seen happen with MLK Jr.? We've already seen all of his most damning quotes being and his speeches being erased from it, and now all we see is, I have a dream, but we don't see any of the other things. It's only these activists and historians who are actually bringing it up. So I would feel nervous about a situation like this, because then I wonder how many other ways are they going to flatten the narrative and make it harder for people to discern whether something is misinformation or if it's actually who that person was. Who's to say? It's kind of harder to parse that when it's a someone who looks like the actual person and is talking like that person, and you can't always tell if what they're saying is from their actual written works or if it's something that the programmer put in there, you know?
Yeah, I have like two thoughts on this. So the first one is that I've kind of already seen a version of this in the real world. So there's an institution in Southern California that developed this one product called Dimensions in Technology. And it's supposed to be an interactive biography. So it gives people the opportunity to have conversational experiences with survivors of the Holocaust and other genocides. And so what they did is that they had an interview with the interviewee. They asked 1,000 different questions. Each of those answers was recorded as a separate video clip, and then those clips were fed into a natural language processor to then match user-generated search terms with the appropriate interviewee response. So then it would play it back as you were typing it, um, as if you were talking to this person in real life. So obviously the major issue that I have with that, I come from a background in oral history. The idea of an oral history is that it's co-created. It's between the interviewee and the interviewer. So you're already removing that layer, because if Gabby asked me a question, I'm going to ask differently than if someone else asked me a question, because they're different relationships. Different information is going to be revealed. So that was the one thing that was kind of eerie about that. I also was playing around with this product, and I looked at some of the funders of it. There is literally no mention of and there's no people who can testify to the ongoing genocide in Palestine. So there we're already seeing the type of bias that is being, behind these types of, it's funded like by Steven Spielberg or something. So it's extremely alarming, because then it kind of creates that dangerous conflation between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And yeah, that's the one thing that I was thinking about. And the other related to something that you said, Gabby, but I completely forgot. So I'm gonna stop talking.
Go ahead,
I
Lorraine.
can I can see this reality happening, and I'm not terribly thrilled about it, but I do have some optimism, only because as much as this technology is like rapidly changing, I do think that more and more people are thinking critically about what this means to like humanity, what this means outside of specific contexts, and how it can affect varying communities. I don't know if things are reversible necessarily, but I do think that, if I feel like I'm in a lot of conversations where it's like humanists versus tech folks. And I do think that humanists largely tend to gravitate towards being very skeptical of this new technology. But I have heard recently of folks who are more STEM minded, who also have a lot of skepticism, who also have direct hands in the shaping of these conversations, and are becoming more and more vocal about how damaging and equally how special humans are, and acknowledging that human beings are special, and this technology is not, people need to readjust their perspective to it being a tool, not being something to enhance the human experience, like in human or extend humanity, but that it is simply a tool that can be manipulated and should be manipulated, not taking over a society or running a society. I'm hearing more and more people in that direction on, I don't want to say both sides of the aisle, considering I'm, I like to straddle both sides, but I think that there are more and more people who are waking up to the dangers of letting this technology kind of extend beyond itself as a tool and its identity as a tool.
And I think that touches on how when we think about like innovation in general, there is some apprehension, but there's largely excitement, right? There's something that's going to make quote unquote life easier or to level whatever playing field. And I think something that's different about this moment, specifically with AI, is there's I think largely people are recognizing that there's little consent, or when we're clicking accept or I agree on these terms of use, the what that actually encompasses, I don't think everyone is on board or signed on for. And I think that inadvertently is kind of encouraging folks to like improve like media literacy, their understanding of these technologies and what actually they're doing and how much information and access we're allowing when we adopt a program or an app or we decide to utilize these things. It's not saying that they're inherently evil. I think that there might be the intention behind a thing is exciting or it might be coming from a good place, but what we've seen and where we get this apprehension or this like, okay, let me just take a beat because it is also moving so rapidly and like things are changing all of a sudden. Now I'm seeing like the little star in the corner, and it's like, wait, this is AI. Like, I don't want to use an AI search engine right now. I just want to get some information. I don't want to feel like I'm participating in this thing that I didn't feel like I signed up for. And I think that part is really important and interesting because it gets to your point, Lorianne, earlier about values and like when we take a beat after things are moving so fast, like just taking a beat, like what do I actually believe in? What do I want to do in this moment? What am I consenting to? And how do I want to engage with this? I think we're all in that space. And it's important to kind of hit the pause button and take time in that space to make these decisions.
Awesome. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the future. So, what do each of you think a library in the year 2050 or an archive or both should look like? What would your hope be? 25, no, 24 short years from now, given the pace and the rapid change of technology of what we're seeing today. What's that vision? I had mine. I'd love to see what how it matches up to your visions.
Is it weird to say that I kind of, when I picture what I want it to look like, it's more like what Edwin described of his actual library. Um, so it's that plus more oral histories recorded by young and old and together, um, putting together programs with library staff and the community and a lot more mutual aid. And if it comes to using generative AI, I wouldn't necessarily want it to be used for what it's doing, but more so for just helping with organizing files and stuff like that. I would want it to be like a background thing, not something that's in the forefront of what the library looks like.
I had a very similar answer. I think what Estelitas is doing is really dope as far as like it's also hyper local. I think that's my one of my like dreams or hopes rather is hyper local in nature. is actually responsive to the needs of its neighborhood, its community, and the actual mass issues that they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. If it is archival in nature, that there's a participatory element to it so that folks can actually develop their own skills to have sovereignty over their own materials, both digitally and physically. Also, no cops, no militarization, right? In public libraries, we see way too many contract security, way too many private security forces, and more information and digital literacy.
Absolutely. Keisha, I'm especially curious as to what you think a high school library should look like in 25 years.
I think it should be and I see it as the heartbeat of a school. It's the center, in terms of just being a space, to Azad's point, that is responsive, that isn't just one thing, but is able to shift towards the needs of the the environment, the school, and what a given young person that enters that space needs in that moment. And I think that they I would hope that in 2050, libraries are full and alive, similar to Estelita's library, where you're meeting people, you're having conversations, you're talking to each other. I think more time being in community and sharing is really important. And that when in 2050, if a student goes into a library and they have a question that they're researching, it doesn't feel like a silo. Oh, I just came in for my answer to this specific question, but more so what I think we've all kind of experienced when you go into a library and you look on a shelf and yeah, you have the book that you were looking for, but you take time to kind of search and you're seeing, wait, what's around here? What is this in conversation with? Oh, there's this person who's also standing next to me. Hey, what are you reading? What are you interested in? And just being a space where we're actually getting out of our our individual like cycle and like really being a part of a community. Because I think that's what a library is, it's community.
I'm gonna jump in quickly. I just want to say thank you. My heart, I'll say when I was thinking of the question, it's like, Edwin, you can't say Estelita. Like that's whack. Like you gotta think something else. And so y'all
Say
really,
it, Edwin.
really blew my heart up.
Yes, say it,
Because
Edward. Say it.
that was the first thing that came to mind, that in 25 years, there's now hundreds or dozens or whatever manifest of Estelitas type. And what we call ourselves is the community living room, right? That folks can come in, put their feet up. There's loud music. You can talk. No one's going to shush you. No one's going to tell you to go in a different room. And I get it. We all have different policies, and folks want quiet rooms, and we'll have that. But it's the place that folks actually get their information, that they get to touch folks and see them and hug them and engage. And there's the coffee shop there, and there's the bookshop. That's why I love that in your book, Veronica. Like there was a coffee shop and she fought to make sure there were real people that were serving the coffee. And like that's what we need and will continue to build. But the housing component is a huge part. Like, yes, space as a practice as a library, but imagine now that the folks who use the library live upstairs and their kids are coming down, up and down, and parents know that they're in good company and they're taken care of and they're looked after because the community loves them. Like that to me builds a determinacy and a durability that technology can't take out. And I think of it as like I have records, vinyl records from 25 years ago. I have film cameras. I have these things become not only nostalgic, they reinvigorate. And folks are like, oh, I don't want to use a digital camera. I want to use a film camera now. And they're lasting because it worked, right? It isn't a speck of a piece of code. It's because it had some quirkiness to it. It had something of value that you can't get digitally. And so I'll be honest, I'm not scared of it, only because I have such a determinate love for our community that we're so damn brilliant that AI is not going to take us out. It just means that we have to be much more committed to building that community that can build on top of, build through. And honestly, when I keep talking about AI as a tool, I have helped folks not get evicted because we were able to, I mean, I'm a lawyer, but we were able to use AI, and I did that for 10 folks. right? Instead of it just being for one. And so there is, I think, a place of they never intended that AI to do that, right? I really think in many ways AI is a distraction. It's a distraction from us seeing what's really happening around us in the world. Well, if you're going to throw me a distraction, I'm going to find a way to leverage the hell of that for our community and make sure that we get everything that we need, not at the expense of folks, but for our folks.
Here, here. All right. Let's see. Since we have a couple, let's see, we have about 15 minutes and we have a couple audience questions. I'm going to end because I am a speculative fiction writer. We're going to end on something a little imaginative. So, if you could pick and speak with one of the virtues from the People's Library, who would it be and why? Lorraine, I'm going to pick on you.
This took a while for me to actually settle, but Jesse Cooper's probably the my top at this point, only because there's something fascinating about the self-awareness piece of his character, to be able to interact and to be able to have certain conversations with a virtue that has that awareness of, historically speaking, and its being itself as a being would just be incredibly satisfying and amazing to for that character to impart knowledge, I guess. The self-awareness is just truly the most interesting part of his character, to be able to, the idea of being able to interact with such a self-aware character would be amazing.
All right, I'm not gonna lie. I didn't pick a virtue from the book. I assumed that it meant like if there were any people who could be virtues. So one of the people that I assumed would likely be a virtue would be Octavia E. Butler, because of her connection to understanding the future, especially when it comes to AI. Like a lot of this stuff is people see her as being sort of an oracle, and she has repeatedly stated that she was never an oracle. She just studied history, paid attention to what was happening at the time, and then projected what would happen if we did nothing. I mean, it's not that we didn't do anything, but you know what I mean. Um, so I would want to talk with her because I want to know what she imagined could happen if resistance was successful. Because her books are usually about what happens when it's not. So I just want to see if she imagined anything else.
I'll go quickly. Augusto Sandino is a revolutionary from Nicaragua, where my family's from. And I'm just fascinated because Nicaragua is the only country in the Western Hemisphere that has ever beat the United States at war twice. And I always wonder, he led the first one. I always wonder what was his imagination in saying, I will, as he said, take on the Yankees. Um, and so, yeah, that would be really cool.
Last two.
All right, I'll
Um,
Any
go.
just
figure.
really quickly. Oh,
Go, 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 go.
Oh, I was gonna say, I agree with Lorian. Like the Golden 13, to my shame, I hadn't learned about them. So being able to talk to uh Jesse and interact with him would be amazing because it really did just feel like communicating to an elder and like what a gift that is. And how our elders are really important. And when you do have older people in your lives in your community, giving them space to kind of talk about their experience. So I agree with that one.
Yeah, I interpreted it similar to Gabby. So I was kind of stressed over this question because I was just thinking about like the afterlife component, and I ultimately decided on like my grandma or like my ancestors or something, like somebody where I like, you know, left in a very immediate way, and I'm still seeking some answers, you know. So wake up.
Awesome. Good picks all around. Okay, we're going to go to audience questions. The first one is for Keisha. You mentioned that zero click thing going on, companies pushing AI content onto us without any real choices. Even our library database vendors are adding all types of AI to their platform. So the question is, how do you empower information seekers and library users to have more agency in these scenarios?
Thank you so much for the question. So I feel like the zero click aspect of things, when I think about teaching online and when like a lot of like ed tech, like we're training students to, okay, we're just gonna click, sign in with your Google and like we're gonna be off to the races. And I think that it's another example of when things just move fast and we're not questioning. So when I think about how to empower information seekers and library users in those kind of scenarios is in creating space for intentionality and just curiosity. Um, it's not to say don't necessarily use this thing, but do a little bit, take a little bit of time and a little bit of research to see like, what is this app? Why do I feel like I need that specific thing to get what I need in this moment? Um, I think as we grow, a lot of us can kind of take for granted discernment that we might have gotten from, to our point, our elders. But I think that young people really deserve that space to know what discernment looks like and like what goes into it, just being a little bit more critical and not taking for granted that these kind of apps have our best interests at heart. A lot of these things are taking from us, and are we taking a moment to see, wait, what are we willing to give in this moment for this quick gain?
Excellent. Thank you, Keisha. This is another question for the panel. What's the best way to advocate for your community being heard within a public library system that talks about listening and responding to community needs, but doesn't always do this? Anyone want to take that one?
Veronica, can you read it again? I don't see it in the question, the Q&A.
Certainly. So, what's the best way to advocate for your community being heard within a public library system that talks about listening to and responding to the community needs, but doesn't always do this?
I would say organize. I would say
Mm,
organize amongst yourselves and try to get a group of people. Maybe there's like I know a lot of public libraries will have like open facing public forum meetings where you can deliver any concerns that you have. Sometimes they leadership respond really well to data. So if you can do data collection and present your case, have some concrete demands, that might be the best way forward.
I
Yeah.
actually I'm so sorry,
No,
Edwin.
no, go ahead, Lauren.
I just attended a talk actually about this very similar condition, and one of the librarians actually said that to the reason why petitions are so successful is not necessarily the data that is collected, the email listing or the contact information. It's to be able to reach out to whoever signed up so that when there is a larger meeting, you can contact everyone, do that blast, and then be able to redirect the attention to specific meetings with specific charges. So very similar to what Azad was saying, like this is an opportunity to strategically organize, even if that, and also it's quite impactful to not only show up, but show the masses. So make sure that anyone who is showing up to a specific meeting, you're all wearing the same shirt or you're all saying the same thing. There's these small little tactics to make people aware of how serious you are and that it's more than one voice that's out there, that it's a visual cue, that the community believes or backs a specific position.
Absolutely.
I'll add quickly that for better or for worse, our libraries are political instruments, right? They're
Hmm.
part of some municipality. You have big ones, small ones. Usually the mayor has a role in the leadership of the library. Um, I say that because that means there's many pressure points. That
Hmm.
means they are susceptible to political pressure, which is what Assad is saying and Lorraine. And I think the organizing is such a key component. Like, for example, the Seattle Public Library, I think it's been over a year now, maybe two, has eliminated late fees. Well, I was interviewed 4 years before at Estelitas, and they're like, well, what makes you different? And we're like, we don't charge late fees. And they're like, why does that matter? And I said, well, because when I was 12 years old, I had late fees that totaled up to $719. And I could never check out another book for 10 years because I didn't have $719. And so I felt like I was a criminal. And that led to conversations that came back to us about how are you doing this? What does it mean? And not that we were the only reason, but you can write an op-ed. You can tell the newspaper. You can say, this is going to, people say, oh, you can't be a one issue voter. Well, guess what? You can be a library voter. And if you don't take care of the library, I'm not voting for you. That's the issue. You make that the campaign to make sure you get what our communities deserve within the library system. Yes, there are other mechanisms. You can email the folks, hey, I seem to have an issue with X, Y, and Z. If they don't respond, that means they want it to be escalated. If they didn't, they would have responded. And so it's, making sure you do go through and see who does or doesn't respond, and then ratchet up a little bit. The organizing, getting to the public meetings, even if the meeting isn't about that. You go to City Hall, if the meeting is about the budget for, I don't know, the water that's at the local park, you're like, I'm going to talk about libraries. And they're like, that's not what I got 2 minutes, so you're going to let me talk. Take advantage of those 2 minutes, say what the issue is, and make it certain that they know the community is worried about this thing.
Excellent, excellent. We have time for one more, and I think this one's important. How can we as LIS professionals help remind folks that they can opt out, especially when AI implementation is pitched as something inevitable? How can we do this safely without institutions we work at punishing us?
I have a direct response to that because I'm currently working through an issue like that in my classes for first year writing. So we can't necessarily avoid talking about AI and everything. And I don't want students to go out and start working on this or using this platform without having any idea of how to analyze what they just found. So basically, we are working on uh, basically some plans for our next semester coming in to address this, but without forcing our students to use AI. So we are hoping to split students into groups, choosing which method they want to search for information. So they can choose whether they want to use an AI tool. They can choose if they want to use a search engine or the university's databases to do this search, right? The other thing is the this is the kind of thing that allows them all to see the difference in the results that they get at the same time without having to use every single one of those. And it also gets them thinking about how they can use the same skills that I'm teaching them about analyzing the information they find, both from databases but also from their AI results. And I try to remind them of that. This is not a skill that I'm telling you to do just for that one paper. This is for life. This is you continue practicing and you continue questioning and asking questions. Um, so that's a huge part of it. Currently, I don't really employ AI in the classroom. I just acknowledge when they're using it and then remind them to check the sources, since we have
Mhm,
had a lot of issues with what's it called, hallucinations.
mhm.
So yeah.
Absolutely. It looks like we are unfortunately out of time, and I feel like we could go on for another hour. But I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for joining us on this panel, for calling in today. Anyone have any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
I would just say thank you so much for creating this space to have this conversation. I think to a lot of the questions that were asked, thinking around like AI is inevitable or that narrative that's out there, I think a way that we push back is by having these kind of conversations where we're communicating with each other and making sense of like or just having space to discuss it. And I think that goes a long way to empowering us at this moment in history and time with this innovation.
Awesome. Thank you all for being a part of this conversation. It was everything that I hoped for and more. Um, cool. Jen, I'll let you take it over from here.
Thank y'all so much, panelists. Look at the Q&A. They're getting a lot of love in emojis, but also the text here. Thank y'all for coming. We're going to pause or stop the recording, and we will follow up when it's available. Thank you so, so, so much, y'all.